what really happened under the basket that night. Sophie Cunningham goes down with a torn right MCL, and the Fever confirms she will miss the rest of the season. Bria Hartley is caught on camera grinning. Fans are furious, calling it intentional. The refs swallowed their whistles. The league has stayed silent. Sophie's career takes a brutal turn, but she isn't backing down. She's speaking out and not holding back, aiming her words at haters and at the league itself. The moment that ripped through the Fever's season wasn't subtle. In the second quarter against the Connecticut Sun, Bria Hartley drove hard to the rim, lost her balance, and fell directly into Sophie Cunningham's right leg. Cunningham crumpled on the floor, clutching her knee in agony, and the arena went silent. Teammates rushed over immediately, and the faces on the Fever bench told you everything. This was no routine knock. Just seconds later, the camera caught Hartley appearing to smile. That frame spread across social media as fans questioned how any player could react like that when another had just gone down with such a serious injury. Viewers filled in the blanks themselves, and many felt the grin looked more like satisfaction than shock. It was that image, as much as the fall itself, that set off the outrage. Now look, you can tell Bria Hartley, in my opinion, she launched herself into her knee. She did. And I've seen some of the reaction online, and guys, it's despicable. It really is. There's a lot of people celebrating this injury, and guess what? You can imagine who it is. It's members of the old WNBA fandom, the ones that root for Paige Beckers and Angel Reese and Asia Wilson and all. The usual damn suspects. The officials, meanwhile, made a choice that only added fuel to the fire. No flagrant call, no upgrade, no official review. The game simply marched on, as if Cunningham hadn't just suffered what turned out to be a season-ending torn MCL. Sophie announcing her being out with an MCL tear, which, by the way, the MCL tear, relatively speaking, is good news because it's not an ACL tear. She's not out for like a year or anything, but she's out for the rest of this year. And they're going to miss her toughness, they're going to miss her shooting, they're going to miss her playmaking to a degree. This wasn't just about one play. Fans pointed quickly to a larger issue that has been building for years. Physical plays going unchecked, and dangerous collisions shrugged off until someone finally gets hurt. And in Hartley's case, this wasn't the first flashpoint of the season. Put together, those incidents made what happened against the Fever look less like an isolated accident, and more like part of a troubling pattern. The reaction didn't just target Hartley either. Fans laid the blame squarely on officiating and, by extension, leadership at the league office under Commissioner Kathy Engelbert. The argument wasn't new, that WNBA referees lean too heavily on letting them play, and in doing so, leave athletes exposed to unnecessary danger. Cunningham's injury became the perfect storm. The latest painful example used by critics who have been waiting for change, and for Sophie, the cost couldn't have been higher. A day later, the test confirmed what everyone feared. A torn right MCL, her season officially over. After battling her way into becoming one of Indiana's most important players, it was gone in an instant, taken out on a play that's now replayed over and over across every platform. The collision wasn't just an injury, it became a symbol of deeper issues fans feel the league is ignoring. In the days after the injury, the first voices the public heard weren't Sophie's. While she stayed quiet and tried to process what had happened, her family stepped up quickly. Her sister Lindsay posted directly at the WNBA, blasting the officiating and pointing out that the league seemed more focused on finding players than protecting them. That criticism landed hard because fans had already been calling for consistency from referees, and here was a player's own family echoing the same frustration. Their mom, Paula, added more fuel in a now-deleted post, describing Hartley as reckless and out of control, suggesting that this wasn't the first time she'd crossed the line. Those posts gave people an unfiltered picture of how raw the emotions really were inside Sophie's circle, and they put immediate pressure back on both the officials and the league leadership. This injury happened, and Sophie Cunningham's sister was none too happy about it, and slammed the WNBA. Maybe you should focus less on finding players for commenting on your poor officiating, and more about hiring officials that are able to call a consistent game and protect your athletes. It's pathetic. Praying for you, Sophie. That's Lindsay, that's her sister. Well, Her sister made this comment, and it brought out the scumbags. When Sophie finally chose to speak, she took a very different tone. On her podcast, she explained the play the way she saw it. Unfortunate but not malicious. She said she believed it was simply a basketball play gone wrong, admitting she was in the wrong spot at the wrong time. Sophie went even further, stressing that she had nothing but love for Hartley, saying the two were good friends, and that she hoped fans would stop sending hate Hartley's way. It was a measured, mature response that surprised people almost as much as the collision itself. Coming from someone sidelined for an entire season, it showed calmness and perspective that challenged the narrative fans had built online. But Sophie didn't stop there. In that same podcast appearance, she pivoted toward a larger issue, accountability. She connected her own injury to a pattern she believed already existed within the league. Referees missing dangerous plays while still imposing penalties when players spoke candidly. She reminded listeners that she'd already been fined herself for comments she made about officials and about Paige Buchers. That point mattered because it explained why her family's frustration had been so sharp. To them, the league was quick to punish words but wasn't doing enough to protect players' bodies. Then came the post that changed the tone entirely. On social media, Sophie dropped a blunt line that spread instantly. Some of us were raised by the words of "don't bite off more than you can chew," and some of us didn't. F around and find out. It was short, director, and a completely different energy from her podcast comments. If her earlier words showed composure, this one was fire. Fans interpreted it as a rallying cry, a declaration that she wasn't broken and wouldn't back down. It channeled the defiance her supporters love and placed her back in the center of the conversation. Well, you come at Sophie's sister. You come at Sophie. And Sophie saw this comment, and bless her heart, she answered it. Some of us were raised by the words of, quote, "don't bite off more than you can chew." And some of us didn't, quote, "F around and find out." F around and find out. Kiss. God bless this woman. Yeah, seriously, she's great. The two sides of Sophie's response, measured respect for Hartley and fiery defiance toward critics, ended up working together, not against each other. The podcast showed her integrity and her willingness to take the high road. The post showed her resilience and determination not to let anyone write her story for her. Together, they painted a picture of an athlete who could balance perspective with passion, who wasn't defined by victimhood even in one of the hardest moments of her career. But that's hilarious. That this hater out there, and there's a lot of them right now. I said yesterday they're mad because Sophie's being called a superstar and this and that and the other. Yeah, Sophie's got more pull than your A'ja Wilson. Asia's on this monumental run. I literally wouldn't have known that if I hadn't stumbled across somebody that said, well, the WNBA is making A'ja Wilson's late season MVP push. Sometimes, you just gotta pay attention. The WNBA wants to protect certain people and certain players. And yet, even with Sophie making it clear that she bore no grudges against Hartley, the question remained for many viewers. Was this collision truly an accident? Or was it part of something bigger about Hartley's style of play that the league had ignored for too long? Bria Hartley's name has carried weight this season, and not for the right reasons. Long before Sophie Cunningham's knee gave out, fans and analysts were already pointing at Hartley as one of the WNBA's most reckless players. That perception didn't appear overnight. It was built moment by moment on a string of incidents that kept putting her at the center of controversy. The clearest example came in a Connecticut Sun versus Chicago Sky matchup, when Hartley got tangled up with Rebecca Allen. Things escalated fast, turning from physical play into a skirmish so heated that both Hartley and Allen were ejected, along with Ariel Atkins. Ejections are rare in the WNBA, so for Hartley to end up tossed in such a fashion was immediately memorable, and not in a good way. Fans watching didn't just see competitive energy, they saw a player crossing a line. Then came her clash with Angel Reese. In a scramble for a loose ball, cameras caught Hartley pulling Reese's hair, yanking her out of position. Officials whistled it as a foul, but fans didn't stop talking about the optics. Why was one player pulling at another's head in the middle of a game? Even more than the ejection against Chicago, this moment cemented Hartley's image as someone who relied on physical tactics that went well beyond tough basketball. Put those moments alongside clips of Hartley making unnecessary shoves and bumping opponents, and you start to see a track record that explains why so many were ready to view the Cunningham collision with suspicion. On its own, a messy fall into Sophie's leg could have been brushed off as a tough break in competition. But when fans online connected it to the Allen fight and the Reese hair pull, suddenly the narrative wasn't about a freak accident, it was about a player with a troubling reputation. That's why, within hours, social media was filled with posts demanding consequences. One fan openly asked why Hartley was still even in the WNBA. Another said flatly, "She intentionally went for her leg while going down. She could have easily avoided Soph." Whether or not intent can ever be proven, the pattern of Hartley's prior run-ins made it easier for thousands of people to believe that what happened to Sophie wasn't purely bad luck. Those prior incidents are why the Hartley-Cunningham play immediately triggered calls for suspension and public anger, and why fans demanded league accountability. This picture is going viral with Bria Hartley with the sinister grin, right? This malevolent look that's on her face right now, clearly smiling after injuring Sophie Cunningham, and yet the WNBA's reaction was silence. No suspension, no public review, no statement clarifying why the play didn't warrant escalation. The criticism spread to the referees and league officials, with many accusing them of letting unsafe play slide under the guise of letting the game stay physical. The larger point is hard to ignore. When a league doesn't address behavior that many view as reckless, the pressure shifts to the players themselves. Hartley may insist that she plays tough basketball, but the perception of her as a dirty player only grows each time the league fails to step in. And while this controversy swirled, Indiana was forced to stare down another reality. With Sophie done for the season and Caitlin Clark already injured, how would the Fever even begin to fight back, down 21 points on the road? The season was saved against the Connecticut Sun, but can it be salvaged, I guess is the question here, because Sophie Cunningham was one of the better players for the Fever all year. She is going to be tough to replace, even if the rest of the squad can get to full strength. But as they battled, as they've continued to fight, to me, you don't punt on the season, because you don't know how many chances you get, and you have to reward that grit. The question just goes back to, again, when is Caitlin Clark going to be back? There remains no clarity on that topic. The response Indiana delivered that night was nothing short of defiant. With key players down and the game seemingly out of reach, the Fever found something most teams can't summon on a stage that hostile: a collective refusal to go quietly. The low point was clear. By the middle of the third quarter, the scoreboard showed Connecticut 63, Indiana 42. They were missing Caitlin Clark, already 2-point guards deep in season-ending injuries, and now Sophie Cunningham had been taken out with a torn MCL. Against a veteran squad like the Sun, a 21-point deficit should have spelled the end. What happened instead was the largest comeback in team history. It started with Kelsey Mitchell, who turned in arguably the best performance of her career. She finished with 38 points, 34 of them after halftime. A number so absurd it reads like a game's worth of scoring, compressed into 2 quarters and an overtime. She knocked down 11 of 22 shots, connected from deep 5 times, and sank 11 of 12 free throws. Once the game hit overtime, Mitchell made it clear whose hands would decide it, dropping Indiana's first 10 points in the extra period, wresting control away from Connecticut when it mattered most. But comebacks like this never hinge on just one player. Aaliyah Boston battled inside for a steady double-double, with 14 points and 13 rebounds, making sure Indiana never surrendered the paint against Tina Charles and company. Alongside her, Natasha Howard posted 18 points with 9 rebounds, keeping pressure on the Sun with aggressive play at both ends. Their combined presence steadied the Fever in the middle, setting the stage for Mitchell's perimeter brilliance. And when the game turned to its knife's edge, role players made sure the work wasn't wasted. Lexi Hall delivered maybe the single most important moment outside of Mitchell's takeover: a corner 3 in overtime with 44 seconds left, giving Indiana the lead for good. It was the kind of shot that rarely makes headlines, but without it, The comeback has no exclamation mark. On the defensive end, players like Hull and Bree Turner made stops late in the fourth that slowed Connecticut's momentum, every possession buying Mitchell more room to finish the job. The magnitude wasn't lost on their coach. Afterward, Stephanie White's pride was written across her words. She said her group had something inside them you can't teach, a toughness that allowed them to push through in moments where most teams collapse. It wasn't coach speak. It was a genuine recognition of grit from a roster stretched beyond its limits. But for all the joy of that comeback, the night also underscored a bitter truth. Sophie's injury wasn't just a setback for Indiana. It highlighted a deeper issue fans and players have been shouting about all season, and one the league can't keep ignoring. Sophie Cunningham's torn MCL isn't just a tough break. It highlights a league-wide pattern of inconsistent officiating and slow enforcement. On the play itself, there was no flagrant call, no upgrade, and no immediate discipline announced. When moments like that pass without action, fans see it as neglect at the top, under Commissioner Kathy Engelbert's leadership. Sophie's family and supporters are calling for exactly that. Quick clarification, an independent review, and clearer officiating standards to protect players going forward. Stephanie White said her team has something inside of them that you just can't teach, and Indiana proved it against Connecticut. Even without Sophie and Caitlin, the Fever's resilience was undeniable, and Sophie's own fiery words online show she'll keep her voice in this fight while she recovers.